Welcome to the Escrima podcast. My name is Jason Inay, and I am an Inayan Serrada. Today I have Bryan here as a guest. I'm going to let him introduce himself, but he's a great martial artist, and I've enjoyed working with him over past two times we met. We met at the Mace, yeah. And then we're here at the 2023 gathering for the Martial Arts Collective Society.
Yeah. So I'm Bryan Parker. I've been doing martial arts for 4 years. Unfortunately, I started my journey in martial arts in Germany while my dad was in the military. So I did Okinawan Shudokan karate. I did whatever martial arts were on the base, because a lot of the GIs had combatives and different styles. When I graduated high school, we moved back to California. I couldn't find the style that I had trained. Mm-hmm. So the Okinawan Shudokan, which is different than Shotokan. Jishin Funakoshi did the Shudokan or the Shotokan, and then one of his peers did the lineage that I'm through. So I couldn't find it. It wasn't a big organization. So then I went into Judo, Jiu-Jitsu, Kung Fu Sansu, Kempo arts, did everything. Did grappling, did tournaments, pretty much all that stuff. It wasn't until later, in 2012, I met Hanshi Bruce Juchnick, and I started training in Kosho. He also trained me in Serrada, the 12-strike system, and got introduced to internals. Before then, I didn't know what they were. It was pretty mystical to me, all the talk about chi and all these things. So through my contacts with Hanshi, I met some internal guys, started training with them, trying to get my head around what is this mystical stuff that they're talking about all the time. And then I found Silat Sarak with Mahaguru Horacio Rodriguez. And I've been with him 10 years now.
You've been doing that for 10 years.
10 years.
So you start off with a type of karate, move into Kosho Kempo, get introduced to Eskrima, Serrada.
That's right.
And then go on a path for internals and end up in Serrada.
Yeah, but I still do all of them, right? So, like my teaching schedule is, Monday I do Serrada, and then we might bounce into Ed Parker American Kempo because I'm an instructor for that art too. And then, Wednesdays it might be De Quartis, and maybe a little bit of Wing Chun. And then Thursdays are completely dedicated to Silat. And then Saturdays I play internals with the guys. Sundays I do Pikiti.
So you're all over the place. In your internals, are you doing Bagua, Xingyi, Tai Chi?
Yeah, that's a good question. So
Nigun?
Yeah, so most people don't know that Hanshi did a lot of Tai Chi. So in Kosho, there's a lot of Tai Chi concepts that are already built in the art. So I got a lot of Tai Chi principles from Hanshi. And then when I started the Silat, our particular lineage of Sarak, one of the mother arts of Sarak was Xingyi.
Okay.
So we have a little bit of Bagua, a little bit of Xingyi in the Silat, and then we got a ton of Tai Chi in the Kosho. So I'm kind of getting...
So when I became an instructor, because my father, he wouldn't allow me to learn from just anybody, and then his rules were like, if I tell you have to stop, you have to stop, right? Yeah. And so I had to wait until I was a guru before I was allowed to learn, and I was like 18 at the time, and I really wanted to learn Tai Chi, and there was this Shaolin Kung Fu Academy nearby in San Jose, Saratoga, California area. Okay. And the grandmaster's name was Sin Kwang Pei, and then the two main instructors that owned the chain of schools is the Swords, SOARDS. And I'm watching Master Sword, or Grandmaster, I don't know what his title is, doing Xingyi, and I was just very impressed with, it's very hardline, the way that he was showing was a very, very typical hardline Kung Fu or Karate, right? Yeah. But the emotional output at every movement and technique, he was demonstrating a guffaw or a laugh, and then just this maniacal look in his eyes as he's doing the technique, and he's explaining how you evoke your power through your emotions, right? So it was pretty interesting, and I've always felt that it was an interesting and good experience. My dad said, you won't learn Tai Chi, just do your basics slow, which is right and wrong, right? Because yes, you do the movement slow, but the thing is with Tai Chi, it's perfect movement done perfectly, fluidly, at a pace where you can maintain that. And as you get better, you're supposed to increase pace, right?
Yeah. With an internal frame.
Right.
So all of the tricks that they do to maintain the frame that all internal styles do.
Do you feel that there's an internal component to Filipino martial arts?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
However, some lineages don't seem to have it as much as others, and I think it's the same martial arts wide. Like Okinawan karate has internals, right? If your teacher was taught them and your teacher felt like he should pass them on to you, because in the Japanese arts, at least back when I started training, if you weren't a 3rd or 4th degree black belt, those things weren't taught. That's the okuden. It's the secrets. They do not teach it.
Yeah, okuden.
Now, you know, internet martial arts are mainstream everywhere around the world. A lot of that's open now. It's taught. There's still stuff that people say are secrets, but then we had a conversation yesterday about how it's all the same. You just got to know how to look for it. And either you're ready and able to see it, or you're not. And that's been my experience.
Yeah, it's. I think the difference is the systems that have, like, say, what we might call internal, they have articulation for it, right? Like I was looking for, so there's an aspect of Filipino martial arts where you're supposed to be able to do dislocations and bone bending and these other things that they, almost mythical kinds of ability, right?
Right.
And so I'm looking for this, and I'm talking to a guy by the name of Bradford Namahu. He's a Kata Zempo grandmaster, right? But he learned under Villebro as well as Ming Lung, and then did Kata Zempo is an offshoot or a part of the Kaju Kempo kind of strata, right? And he goes, "Oh yeah, you have it already. I've seen you do it." And he goes, and so when we went through the discussion, he starts explaining what that was really. He goes, "Oh, it's already in your technique. You're doing it. And your father knew about it, but didn't know how to tell you where it was, right? It was always been there." And it goes back to, like, it's usually in the art if you're willing to see it and find it, and then where you change your emphasis, and then also if there's articulation, there needs to be, like, instead of it being an implicit thing, it needs to be an explicit thing. So, Pikiti, as an example, is very explicitly expressing Filipino martial arts in a certain way, which is the same martial art that modern Arnis is expressing, but the way that they are explicit in certain areas and implicit in others. Like, oh, that's just not the thing that we focus on. Like a Balintawak, the trapping, that is present in most of the Cebuano styles, right? But the Balintawak emphasizes the trapping and the manipulation of the opponent's tool and stick and arm more so than other styles that do that. Like because you have tapi, right? And you have, I think that's a modern Arnis term, and then you have tapping in general that you find, like the Sayak Pikiti guys, they call it tapping, but it's all that trapping that's there. It's just that Balintawak's articulation for it, and then their structure for developing it. It's the thing that they are focusing on.
So it's a signature for them.
Yeah, signature for them. Yeah. So what's your impression? I wanted to get your impression so far, because this is the second time that we've worked together, and you assisted me, which I really appreciate, because I'm like, so what I said is, I don't have any students here at the gathering. Patrick wasn't able to come with me. He's at a wedding in Chicago, right? So I go, Brian's a member of the online organization. I'll get Brian to help me. And then I'm like, it's your private lesson. What do you want to do? Because I'm not going to, no one else is going to become my student. You're actually interested. So, like, what's your impression second time through working with me and getting to ask a question about Blade and all that other stuff? Like, what was that like?
Man, I've been to Stockton a lot of times for training. I won't mention names, but I've been around for quite a while, seeing a lot of the people who are currently instructors and teaching. And it's like the shirt you usually wear while you're teaching. We are not the same. You immediately stood out to me. I've seen the same. I've seen Serrada. I've seen DeQuerdas. I've seen the stuff that is coming out of Stockton today. I don't know what came out before. What were some of the first generation, training and students like, and that kind of thing. Because I've only got my own little time capsule that started maybe 10 years ago with FMA. It's still new to me. 40 years of martial arts, I've only been doing it for 10. And then the whole 10 years I've been doing it have been focused on other martial arts and did FMA too. So back to the question though, you had technique variations, you had movement patterns that were very different. Immediately stood out to me that were different than what I was used to seeing. The inside block for like a number 9, and your position and how low you were. Most people aren't willing to get down that low anymore and take that position, especially inside. Stuff like that. I approached you, and you were very open to talking with me and spending time with me, even though you didn't know who I was, what experience I had, who my other teachers were. I really appreciated that. You know, sometimes you approach a master and don't have time for you, can't even look at you and give you 20 seconds versus the 15 minutes that you gave me, right? So that was more than enough to get me to join the Patreon, right? Was, man, you know, if that's what I got just today and you got a bunch of content up, there's hours and hours of stuff for me to go do. This time I wasn't expecting you to come up and ask me to you know, dummy with you. It was a surprise, but it was an opportunity, right? So that was fun yesterday. The thing I really don't see a lot, you know, and even in my own Serrada training, is you go through the 1 through 12 strike system, but it's all stick. The only time you do any dagger is on a number 10 or a number 12 strike in drills. So there's no specific training, at least for me. How do you do Espada dagger, right? Like, what are beyond the basics? And then I never see anybody do knife, do just blade. They're always stick, machete style type of techniques. But I heard Cabales also did a little bit longer sword, he also did blade, he also did joint locks, he also did takedowns. I don't see it anymore.
Yeah, you know, actually, my friend Mark Chang, he's like, you know, the thing is with Serrada is that the movement signature for Serrada is not in the fore of the mind of the FMA practitioner today or the martial arts practitioner today. So, you know, there's obviously the movement signature that's very easy to discern between all the different Bikini Tertia brands or versions or flavors, if you will.
Yeah.
That though there are several prominent flavors of Balintawak, there's a very distinct signature to the way that they move. And Serrada is diffuse. And this is coming from someone who used to be an editor for Lago magazine, right? So he's out on the scene, he's an instructor under my Uncle Dan as well. That's how I met him, is through the Inasan Martial Arts Association, Instructor Association, International one. And so I use him as a sounding board, and he's like, you know, the thing is with Serrada is there's just the movement signature isn't there. Like, you don't see that movement signature. When you go back and you look up Serrada into Cabales, that movement signature is not prevalent, and it's not something that everyone's deeply aware of like they used to be in the 80s and the 90s, like when Serrada was really the premier Filipino martial arts program to seek out, right? At least for that, you know, there's a lot of people that are disgruntled about, you know, Grandmaster Cabales being called the father of Eskrima in the United States, right? You know, this, you know, I don't know if that's jealousy or if they just feel that their lineage is one thing or another. And the reality is if it wasn't for people like Ed Parker and Ernie Reyes Sr., you wouldn't have that, because they gave an audience, a very large audience, an opportunity to see Serrada from its proponents during that time. So that's Angel, of course, and then Dentoy Revelar, my Uncle Dan Inosanto, Richard Castillo, my father, Jimmy Tacosa. Some of these guys were out there doing that then, right? And so, but it's not present anymore, right? So, you know, my effort, you know, I was talking to Nick Merchant, I don't know if you met him.
I did.
Right, yeah. So he's the most recent WCAF grand champion in his category, but he's a Serrada guy. He learned under Jeff Finder, who also had a grand championship back in the day for WCAF, right? Went to the Philippines and fought. So he's done some good things to put Serrada as a name, bring it out to the awareness, but the movement signature, not so much, right? So I'm talking to him about that, and you know how we should move, and it kind of goes back to you know how you were saying that there was the variations of the way that we train in Inayan and things like that.
Yeah.
Everything's about geometry and getting low. And when you look at Mono Angel doing the techniques, the video quality is terrible because it's Super 8.
Yeah.
Usually it's projected onto a screen that someone VHS recorded that, and then that's been digitized. So there's no sound.
Right.
And I had some of the original Super 8 from that, but a lot of it's deteriorated. So we have mostly just VHS, which we've digitized as well. And for the most part, if it comes from the Inayan library, it was never supposed to be released. And after my father passed, some of it was released because some of his students got a hold of it and wanted to release it, right? But it was never supposed to be released. But that footage is what we have remaining from that time. That's because some of the other videos that Manong Angel produced with different people had deliberate errors in them, like misrepresentations, because Manong Angel wanted to know where you learned it from.
That was common.
And my dad did the same thing. So the videos that are all through Abanico Productions, they have deliberate errors in them, so that we can look at it and go, we know where you learned. Right? We can see. And so like even, I remember my dad talking about how we could see how someone moved and tell who they learned it from. Right? We called it thumbprinting at the time.
Bryan Parker did the same thing.
Yeah.
Serrada Arts do the same thing.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
But the signature is gone. And so that's what I wanna revitalize. The only other person that I know of that's trying to maintain that signature, well, there's two people. There's my uncle Perry Kramer, who is, a lot of people don't know, he was the training partner for Manong Angel in the late 70s, where he was 14 or 15 at the time, right? He's out teaching, but it's very underground. In fact, he calls his group the Underground Screaming Club, right? So won't tell you where he's located because he doesn't want to be found necessarily, right? But I brought him in some years ago before COVID to teach my gurus. Because I want to keep my lineage. I want, as long as my elders are around, I want to expose them. So for a while, I was bringing my Uncle Jimmy in, and now, every once in a while I bring my uncle. I brought my Uncle Perry in once, and my Uncle Remy is the other person that's still around. He was the first person to become a guru under my father, and he used to ride his bike to Gong Lee's in Stockton. He's my mother's brother and stuff. So, but I'm always referring back to those guys, asking, like, where is it? And so it's a lot of it is that low posture.
Yeah, it's weird that you were just talking to Guru Finder, because about 3 months ago, I asked him to come over to my house to spend a day with me and my students. And some of the questions, we worked up questions ahead of time. I had like 30 questions printed out and ready to go ahead of time. And he answered every single one of them, which was awesome. But one of the first questions on the list was, what are the principles of Serrada? Other than hold your ground, what are they? Because even with the training that I had, it was never addressed. It was just nothing, formalized. Like we have a formal way of signaling our striking angles, a formal way of doing our basics, but I didn't get formal education on the principles. Like, what is Serrada? What's the signature? What makes it unique? Do
you want my answer, or you can give me his answer?
No, well, I mean, I'd have to go look up some of it. But
what's your answer?
That's hard because it becomes blurred for me, and that's part of what I'm chasing right now. Is when is my Serrada no longer Serrada, and it's just some other FMA that I saw somewhere where I used to train, or that I flowed into because of different muscle memory, that kind of thing. So fundamentally for me, where I'm at in my training, because I've trained so many arts, some of them deep, but most of them just breadth, right? I switch in and out of stuff, and I blend, and I don't always know, hey, did I do that whole thing in Serrada? Or did I, bastardize, if you will? Started with Serrada, but then it went to, De Cuerdas, and then it ended up with some modern armies, because I've taken all three, right? And without knowing those principles and having that signature foremost in my mind, it makes it hard for me to know what I'm doing.
Yeah, it's true, especially with De Cuerdas, because De Cuerdas, what they typically do, I don't know with your particular flavor of De Cuerdas, but they typically teach Serrada so that they can teach how De Cuerdas beat Serrada, right? Which is an interesting way to approach teaching. I'm going to teach you karate so that I can teach you how Kung Fu beats karate. But okay, so it's hard because now the line is really blurred, right? Because now you can't teach an art without that art, and so it's very easy for you to transition in and out, right? And you find that too when you train in other arts, and it's normal because really when we talk about It's physiology, physics, geometry, and psychology. It's present in all of the arts, right? And so then when we remove a lot of the bias, which is style names and the lineage and all that stuff, it becomes all the same at some point. And you need to be able to swing from everything being the same to everything being different and be able to go back and forth to gain insight, right?
Yeah.
But as far as how I look at it, like, I often do this. How do we know we're doing Serrada? And I'll teach this in class, right? Like most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, I'm facing the blow. I'm facing specifically where the enemy's tool will be placed at the end of my catch. So if I do a pass, like I do an outside basic on an angle 1, do your pass here, then my shoulders will be framed off to the right. My right foot will be back, my left foot will be forward, and I'll be able to face where I anticipate the next blow to come.
Okay.
It's very rarely will I have a shoulder away from it, right? Sometimes, but not very often. It helps to know that like some of the counters, like a lot of people do the shoulder counter and they never open their hand. It's closed. They'll do a closed hand version of it.
Okay.
So I don't know if you've come across that version.
Version I do is with 2 fingers.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
But there's another version, and sometimes people will learn it with their right leg forward. Sometimes they'll learn it with their left leg forward, but they'll shed this way.
Yes, especially like the Kidi does it that way. It's a closed hand with a longer stick.
Yeah. In Serrada, if your lineage is shooting back to that first gen, so the first gen is going to be Dentoy Revelar. It's going to be my dad, Perry Craver, Al Conception, Uncle Jimmy, right? Juan Eliab is in there somewhere, right? So these guys are the first, right? Like when you get if you've ever seen there's an old. I sometimes I post a picture of it. It's a trifold brochure. It's like Serrada Escrima, and it has Angel at the top, and then it has my Uncle Jimmy and my dad and my Uncle Danny and Richard Bastia, and I think one other person, maybe my Uncle Remy or it might be Perry. I'm not sure who it is, but as the instructor's teaching all over California, that's that first generation, right? And they were doing the counter that way because they were banging on each other so hard they couldn't open their hand anymore. So they changed the counter because they couldn't open their hand anymore because it was so swollen from fighting, right? But
hardcore back then.
Yeah, right. It's not so much closing, but that is the way that it'll be expressed most of the time. And remember that it was before it was called Serrada, it was just called Escrima. The original pictures of Manu Angel teaching as Escrima just says Escrima Master.
Really?
It doesn't say Serrada Escrima.
Huh.
There was a time where it goes from being called Escrima to being called Serrada Escrima as a result of someone saying, Manu, your style has maraming Serradas. And then he started calling it Serrada Escrima.
Wow.
Right? And so we got to remember that that's not, while it's part of the movement signature, it is not the sole defining thing as the closing. There is a whole, in which I taught yesterday, lock and block kind of, or rather not lock and, largamano kind of element, right? Yeah. There is a largamano element. There is the dumog, the joint locking and the takedowns and all that stuff. There's the disarming and everything else as well. There's a dos manos where he manipulates the stick with both hands, right? That's mostly gone. Most people don't teach that anymore, right? But we know it's Serrada because we're engaged. We don't disengage like Largamano will typically do. There's always engagement, right? And the other thing is the life hand. The life hand isn't meant to manipulate the stick, which you see in Balloon to Walk, because it's not a stick, it's a sword, right? The arcs are designed the way that they are because it's made for a blade. The reason why you can strike flat with Balloon to Walk and why it's all to the head is like you can take a full power blow for a 1 1/4 inch stick to the body and it'll hurt. You might break a rib or something like that, but you can keep fighting. With the blade, you cannot. And you can't articulate a blade that way, so that's why you have the diagonals. When you see diagonal lines, it indicates the presence of blade technology in there. Otherwise, you'll see flat strikes. Okay. Because a blade will throw you off balance if you go flat, right?
Yeah,
if it's heavy.
Yeah.
So if you go diagonal, the cut's better, the stroke is better, right? And I can use gravity to recover the tool. Right. So this is what part of my understanding and insight through practice and training and being exposed. I know I'm doing Serrada because I'm facing the blow. I know I'm doing Serrada because I'm shutting off the power and I'm staying engaged. I know I'm doing Serrada because my hand is inhibiting my opponent's ability to defend and attack, right? And that's one of the things that kind of defines Serrada, if we were to call those principles or concepts, right? I mean, in reality, what we're doing is interdiction of force, redirection of force, while wedging into the person to create dominance of the center line.
And that's how it felt yesterday when you were coming into me too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was on the outside.
Yeah.
And I was still wedging into your center line.
Completely checked off.
Yeah. And so, if I want to check and trap and do that, I'm going to need to do that. And you notice that we're almost similar in height, but I'm a full head underneath you, right? In terms of the height relationship, they do that. And that's to approximate the movement signature and the way that it was expressed under Angel. When Angel was using a 24 to 30 inch stick.
Wow.
That's the thing. Some of the, like the double hand manipulation that I talk about that people aren't teaching, you can't teach with an 18 or a 24 inch stick. Because your hand doesn't reach, your arm doesn't reach, right? So you have to be able to do that. But that's...
And that was part of what you showed me in Manteca too, is some of the ability to get that stick from different angles. Don't really see it.
Yeah, and I ask people, I'll ask them, I'll probe them, I'm like, oh, what is this? And they'll say, oh, it's just a warm up or something like that. But it was a thing that...
I think that was my answer to you, actually.
Yeah.
I saw it as a warm up. Like
Yeah, I can't do it. I don't practice it as much as I do, and I didn't learn a lot of it, but I did learn it. And I learned it for a little bit from my dad, and mostly from my Uncle Jimmy, and some comments he did, and things that my dad would do, and my Uncle Remy would do. Right, is this whole thing of movement and using that to do other things.
Yeah.
You see some of that in some of the other Cebuano styles, but Manong Angel used to use it. I think it's the thing that he kept hidden from everyone. It's like, oh, because like, I mean, it's the whole sentiment. He's talking about some other Eskrima master at one point, and they're mad at each other, and he goes, oh, he only knows 5 angles. I'll beat him with the other 7. Right. It's this high idea, which is good if you're a fighter, you can keep your secrets, right? But it doesn't serve the art, right? Because then what you have is replicate fading.
Yeah.
Right. So that's unfortunate, right? But,
which is happening.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like that's why, like, I have a number of students now that I just teach everything to. Doesn't care what, I don't care what rank they are anymore. What title they may or may not carry responsibility. I know that if I don't teach it, I might not ever teach it.
Yeah, it might get lost.
Yeah. I mean, you know, it was very liberating. My Uncle Danny said something in one of his seminars. He goes, the art comes from the creator for you to use, and it will return to the creator. And that, for me, being someone who inherited a lineage and everything, was liberating. Took the weight off the shoulders, right?
Yeah.
Like my uncle was saying it was never yours to begin with, right? And you can take care of it and do your best for it, but it won't be lost because it's always there. Because it's always physiology, psychology, geometry, physics. It's always going to be present, right? If you're just willing to see it, to work through it, and become mature enough to understand it, as opposed to absorb what is useful, add what is holy, and discard the rest. That whole discard the rest part, I do not agree with. I put that on a shelf because clearly I suck at that. Is the way that I look at it. Right. I've been talking in my podcast with my student Charlie, who got attacked from behind. He's straddled a bike. 4 a.m. in the morning. He's going to work at one of the coffee shops, one of the big coffee chains, right? Okay. And a homeless guy attacks him from behind. Oh man! And he turns, he parries it, disarms him, pushes the guy over while still straddling the bike. He was 18 at the time. Got a few scratches. The thing is he said that I could hear you saying that I was doing it wrong in my head as it happened. Yeah. So clearly there's a gestalt there. There's an association with the action, the movement, and me berating him, right? But he was able to defend himself against a surprise attack. He was kind of aware. There was a feeling. He turns, he sees this guy attacking. He's able to defend. He does the disarm, right? And the fact that he did the disarm, when people say that'll never happen in a real fight, well, that's a real fight. That's a real fight. It wasn't scheduled. Yeah. Right? It wasn't rehearsed. He's not in his weight category.
And
he wasn't really prepared. No, he just did. He just, I defended and I just took it away, and then I pushed the guy over. And bless his soul, he was like, and I stopped myself because I could have stabbed him, but I didn't want to because that's not what my mom taught me what to do.
Shouldn't have to carry that.
And so he chucked the knife, pedaled his bike to work, cleaned up, and then went into shock. Wow. So we know we're doing Serrada when it works. That's the other thing. We all got to remember that Eskrima is ultimately a pragmatist martial art. Where we should value empirical experience over tradition and
Trends.
pomp and ceremony. We should value the kind of experience or the kind of mentality of those old moms of Stockton. In that, let's try. You try, you hit me, boy. Come on. And I think that's a good part of knowing that if not Serrada, at least Stockton legacy, and if not Stockton, at least just Filipino martial arts. It's got to work.
Yeah.
Right. Does that kind of brighten things up? Or
one of the things your refiner told me, he says your Serrada's good unless you're getting hit.
Mm-hmm.
You get hit, you're doing it wrong. So
yeah, and the thing that they're saying these days is like, I don't even know if Serrada will work in real full contact, right? This is something I've read a couple people comment on the different things, which I very rarely even pay attention to. When my dad's student started the Inayan Serrada Digest way back in the 80s, right? Which eventually just became the Eskrima Digest. We would mostly read those things, because that was the only form at the time.
yeah.
We would mostly read it, and my dad would be like, these guys just don't get it. I mean, he would literally, he wouldn't say anything disparaging about any particular person. These guys are instructors, a lot of them now, that were, commenting and pounding on their keyboards, right? He wouldn't disparage him. He'd just be like, you don't get it. And then that was it. And I still see the same thing. So still now to this day, I barely pay attention to things. But the one thing that's gotten back to me, people say, hey, people think Serrada doesn't work in full contact.
You can just get hit with an incidental hit, like a glancing blow in training, and you'll drop your damn stick. Your hand will go numb, just from not even leaning it.
Right.
So I don't get that perspective of Serrada won't work in a real fight. I mean, what you did to me yesterday, the way you entered, the energy, the low to the ground, the completely checking off both sides of my body, I'm off balance, you're getting free hits. What do you mean it doesn't work, right?
Serrada doesn't work if you can't approximate its context, right? So it's a movement model and it's a proximity requirement, right? Each style it has dependencies. Wrestling has a level dependency, right?
True. Yeah.
And a proximity dependency, but it doesn't. I mean, it has its own dependency because they need to be in front of you, right? Like Taekwondo works best if you're to the side. That's a zone dependency, right? Taekwondo works best if they can move in. That's a movement dependency, right? So if we understand the style from that point of view of its movement, its proximity, its zone, its level, right? And then its specific forms of tactics that it employs to achieve whatever tactical or strategic goal it has to define victory, then it works.
Right.
The problem is that a lot of the people that were trained to use Serrada or have used Serrada in a venue where they're doing full contact, 1 1/4 inch stick or bigger, thicker, and they're doing, maybe fencing masks and lacrosse gloves and that's it, or whatever the venue is, right? Is that they're not either able to stay close enough or they're getting too close.
Yeah.
So that's the thing, is that you can't be too close in Serrada and you can't be too far, right? And that's where you have to do, like what you said, when do I leave Serrada? Because I'm flowing into these different styles.
Yeah.
As an escrimador, at least in the Inayan, it's instantaneous adaptation. You're going to have to be versatile, right? So, yeah. Anyways, that's the podcast. What did you think?
No, it was fun to be here.
Thank you for coming. I always like your insight. Hope to work with you again in the future. And we'll see you on the training floor.